Mega Man X needs no introduction. It's one of the most popular 2D platformers of all time. The sequels need a bit more of a preamble. It's obvious that with every iteration of the X series post X4, it fell further and further into unpopularity. The dog-water release of Mega Man X7 left little in the way of hype for a follow-up. Although this wasn't without its nuances. In a recent interview with Protodude on the Rock Band Corner, a former Capcom employee revealed that X7 was one of the rare Mega Man titles to sell better in the United States than Japan. This greatly influenced the direction of X8's development, where the feedback of English-speaking audiences was considered with much greater scrutiny than previous X titles. This led to the very rare US first release schedule and moderately successful sales numbers. Despite this, the game still feels like something of an anomaly, because it's been shafted by its less than stellar predecessors not once, but twice now. The first was, as I mentioned earlier, its original release, following a very underwhelming 3D title.
Gorilla Attack!
While the second time was its grand return to modern platforms in Mega Man X Legacy Collection 2, where it is commonly recommended that you steer clear and save your $20 because in addition to X8, Legacy Collection 2 would install a series of viruses on your computer named Mega Man X5, X6, and X7. On a personal note, despite playing and beating every other X title, I never even got past the first 3 Mavericks in X8. Even though I did buy Legacy Collection 2, I made the grave error of attempting to marathon all 8 X games in a row. The 3-hit combo of 5, 6, and 7 left me on a hair trigger for the uninstall button, and the game's recommended order starting with 2 Ride Chaser stages broke me. Since then, I haven't given the game a fair shake, but hearing about the game's supposed parallels to the biblical epic Paradise Lost had me intrigued enough to give it a second try. X8 begins with the introduction of the Jacob Project, a plan to escape the ruined planet Earth by the means of a massive orbital elevator to colonize the moon. This is achieved by the advent of so-called new generation Reploids, the next step in Reploid evolution capable of mimicking the forms and abilities of other Reploids through a new technology called the copy chip. Suddenly, a descending elevator car flies off the rails as the game's subtitle flashes on screen. X arrives on the scene and requests immediate backup to aid in rescue operations, but much to his disbelief, an entire army of Sigmas march out from the capsule. The crowd parts and reveals a purple-haired Reploid by the name of Lumine. Lumine explains that he and his cohorts had to copy a sturdy Reploid body to protect themselves, and due to new generation Reploid's immunity from viruses, they're capable of transforming into Sigma with no fear of going Maverick. The exchange ends with Lumine revealing his role as the director of the Jacob Project. The game cuts to Hunter HQ as Alia dispatches the Hunters to the base of the Jacob facility. Here, X0 and Axel all work together to take down a rampaging mechanoloid. The stage ends with the reveal that Vile has also been smoking whatever grass keeps bringing Zero back from the dead, and that he's managed to capture Lumine for what he describes as the birth of a new world. Back at base, Alia and X question what Vile meant by a new world, and what the orbital elevator has to do with it. However, Alia gets interrupted by the detection of 8 new Mavericks, all wreaking havoc in locations related to the Jacob Project. As is typical of the X series, plot during the hunt for the 8 Mavericks is light, being relegated to pre-boss dialogue and post-stage conversations in Hunter HQ. X expresses his regret that the conflict must go on. Axel,
just the thought of wiping the floor with those Mavericks makes my trigger finger itch.
Does not. And Zero practices loyalty to his partner.
Great job, Zero.
Thanks.
Alia and her new Navigator colleagues, Palette and Layer, question how new generation Reploids are going Maverick in the first place, due to their apparent virus immunity. This is corroborated by Axel, since he's a prototype new generation Reploid himself. By comparing the data on Axel's copy chip to that of the finalized new generation Reploids, Alia discovers that the final models contain data that highly resembles that of Sigma. They're unsure what it all means, but the Hunters press on. A neat thing about X8 is that the Maverick's pre-boss dialogue changes after the reveal that Sigma is related to the copy chip. Once all 8 Mavericks have been defeated, Sigma contacts Hunter HQ to gloat that he controls the keys to the new world in space, and that the old world the Hunters seek to defend has been made obsolete. Fortunately, his signal cuts out and the orbital elevator remains operational, allowing the Hunters to give chase. After fighting their way to the top, Vile appears and continues to chuckle fuck about how Sigma and the new generation Reploids finally managed to take control over the means to creating a new world. Following his defeat, he flees, and the hunt for Sigma takes our trio to the orbital gateway, where the boss rush lies. After re-finishing off all 8 Mavericks and fending off their reality imploding, the facility begins to self-destruct. Making it back to the entry point, X finds himself face to face with Sigma, who reiterates his plan to replace Earth with a world built in his own image. But following X's victory, this Sigma is revealed to be nothing but a new generation Reploid using their copy chip to mimic Sigma. The hunters gear up one final time and trace the original Sigma to the moon's surface. They put that green fuck out of his misery and break into the palace proper. It's crawling with Sigma copies and covered in deadly spikes, but they eventually reach the throne room. Here, they find a demonic incarnation of Sigma, barely held together by a body of space junk. He claims responsibility for the initiation of the Jacob Project and the production of new generation Reploids as a whole. A battle ensues, and instead of his usual cursing of X and claiming he'll get his revenge, Sigma is instead, seemingly, finally defeated. Lumine arrives, appearing no worse for wear, and claiming that Sigma was simply a pawn in his grand scheme. Right as he crushes the villain's skull beneath his boot, Lumine states that the new world has finally arrived and initiates our final battle. He attacks solely using the copy chip to mimic the strongest attacks of the 8 new generation Mavericks. After defeating Lumine, X hesitates and allows Lumine to get back up. He begins to explain the nature of the copy chip. For it to function, it needed data from hundreds of old model Reploids, including Sigma. The result of this is that new generation Reploids are capable of rebelling and going maverick at will, something old model Reploids weren't typically capable of. He continues by stating that the nature of the world, humanity, and Reploids have all permanently changed, and all of those not part of the new world must be exterminated. Lumine undergoes a seraphic transformation, and the true final battle ensues. The fight is intense, especially if you don't realize that you can fall off the side for some reason. Once Lumine is backed into a corner, he'll initiate his most powerful attack, Paradise Lost, which, if they're not careful, will kill our heroes in an instant. Once he's knocked out of this state, Lumine kneels defeated, with his eyes wide open facing the stars. Axel approaches only to get ambushed by a tentacle from Lumine's chest. X and Zero rescue Axel and finish the job. Axel's badly hurt, but still alive, and X holds him in his arms as the 3 head for the elevator. Zero reaffirms a faltering X that no matter what, they're going to have to continue to fight, both for their world and against their own destinies, because if they don't, then they too will become obsolete by some form of evolution, even if the new generation Reploids had failed. As a result of Lumine's revolt, all new generation Reploid projects are cancelled, albeit only temporarily, as the demand for them continued to rise. The game ends on a shot of Axel's shattered helmet gem, revealing a purple crystal lodged inside. If it wasn't obvious from the subtitle and Lumine doing the equivalent of saying, "I'm going to Jeff the kill you," this game carries many parallels to John Milton's epic Paradise Lost, and by extension the early books of the Abrahamic Bible. To give a brief synopsis of Paradise Lost, the book has 2 arcs, one following the fallen angel Satan, and the other telling the tragedy of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Known formally as Lucifer, Satan initiates his fall from grace by leading an army of angels in a rebellion against God in heaven. After 3 days of combat, the Son of God banishes Satan and his army to hell. According to Christian theology, this makes the fallen angels into demons. Following this, what are essentially the events of the first book of the Bible, Genesis, take place. Over 7 days, God creates the earth and, by extension, man. In creating Adam and Eve, he grants them free will and instructs them not to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. At this point, Satan has managed to free himself from the depths of hell and has infiltrated the Garden of Eden. Taking on the form of a serpent, he convinces Eve to consume the fruit of the tree of knowledge, which inevitably leads to Adam doing the same. The first humans experience guilt and shame as a result of defying God. This act is otherwise known as original sin. Satan returns to hell and proclaims victory over God's creation. At that moment, Satan and his demons all begin to transform into snakes, punished by God for their arrogance. Meanwhile, Adam and Eve beg God for forgiveness, while he sends the Archangel Michael to show them a vision of humanity up to the Great Flood. the Archangel speaks of humanity's eventual redemption through Jesus Christ as the first humans are banished from the Garden of Eden. Now, comparing a dramatization of the creation myth from multiple major world religions to the 8th entry of a video game about a blue guy who has a gun for a hand may seem a little silly, but there's some terribly fascinating thematic parallels that make the game's characters quite a bit more interesting and three-dimensional than they first seem. To start, I want to go back to the series' origin with Dr. Light's creation of X and Dr. Wily's creation of Zero. By creating a new form of life, X, and then granting it free will, Dr. Light takes on the role of something similar to that of God creating Adam. But that's not all, because he explicitly created X for the purpose of saving humanity, which is also the role of God's Son, Jesus Christ. It gives X this dual role of not only being a Reploid, which is a new form of humanity given free will, but also as the Redeemer descended from the quote-unquote God that created his species. I mean, X himself has been portrayed as a Christ figure on multiple occasions. He opposes all violence, yet he still recognizes that he needs to use the strength he's been given to fight for justice. He's seemingly incapable of going Maverick despite being a Reploid. And speaking of Reploids, all Reploids were made in X's image. But X's inner workings are still something of a mystery, drawing a connection to how God made humanity in his own image, yet the true nature of God himself is considered a sacred mystery. Much like how the story of Jesus on Earth ends with him sacrificing himself for humanity, X's physical body is destroyed to seal away the Dark Elf and put an end to the Elf Wars that occur between the X and Zero series. Additionally, despite Teppen being a non-canon crossover, you can't get much more obvious than giving X a massive halo. Zero is a bit less clear-cut. He begins life as an emissary of Dr. Wily by being Patient Zero for the Maverick virus, something that bears resemblance to Satan invading the Garden of Eden and being the catalyst for original sin. After passing the virus to Sigma through a baptism by combat, Zero begins to resemble that of the Archangel Michael in Paradise Lost. For one thing, Michael is described as militant and often portrayed with a sword. I would also draw parallels between the nature of angels and Zero himself. While X is shown to be an incorruptible force of good, Zero's capacity to go Maverick is brought into question numerous times across the series. Similar to how the difference between an angel and a demon is a simple act of rebellion against humanity. It showcases a duality within Zero, since he's both the beginning of the Maverick virus and one of the greatest Maverick hunters. The creation of X and Zero as the origin of all Reploids gives their creators statuses as imperfect deities, and Reploids as a new form of life holding free will, in addition to taking on the role of angels as humanity's guardians. Dr. Light becomes God by granting a new species free will. Through this, Reploids become similar to that of the first humans, which are then corrupted by the Maverick virus created by Wily that can be compared to original sin. The mantle of Satan and his demons is then taken on by Sigma and his Mavericks following their infection for most of the series, waging war against humanity as he views his own species, the Reploid, as superior to the humans they're supposed to protect. This mirrors one of the cited motivations to Satan's rebellion, which was his refusal to be guardian of humanity due to believing himself superior. Skipping over Axel and Lumine for a minute, the most important location in the game is the Jacob Orbital Elevator, the project that was intended to save humanity from their world corrupted by Mavericks and allow them to live peacefully in space. The elevator, both in name and function, is a reference to Jacob's ladder, which is a literal ladder leading to heaven seen by Jacob, the brother of Esau, during a dream in the book of Genesis. The end goal of the Jacob project is plainly comparable to that of heaven. Had it succeeded, humanity would live on what would essentially be a separate plane of existence free from their scarred homeworld. The new generation Reploid seizing control of the project and intending to begin their own New World Order parallels the war waged by Satan against heaven. Lumine and the new generation Reploids, like that of Sigma and his Mavericks, bear many similarities to that of Satan and his fallen angels. In the opening, they're all shown to be capable of shapeshifting via the copy chip, much like how Satan used the visage of a serpent to convince Eve to commit original sin. And briefly going back to Sigma, he sports a design that's a massive departure from his typical look that was intentionally designed to look like a demon. It exists in stark contrast to that of Lumine's angelic second form. And for a second, I want to talk about how much I love Lumine's second form. The black feathers shedding from Lumine's body as he transforms, implying his status as a fallen angel despite his actual color scheme being mostly white. He gains 6 wings, which is consistent with the biblical descriptions of the highest of the angels, the seraphim, and his fight takes place in an arena that looks like it could be painted on the ceiling of a church. Plus, even his name, Lumine, is the Latin word for light, which is incredibly close to Satan's original name, Lucifer, which translates to Lightbringer. But much like X and Zero, I believe Lumine holds a dual purpose in the narrative. Much like how Light originally created Reploids, Sigma created the new generation. During one of Lumine's monologues, he reveals that due to the presence of Sigma's data in their copy chips, they hold the ability to go Maverick at will. I'd say this paints Sigma not only as Satan, who is now passing the mantle to Lumine as Zero did to him, but also implicating Sigma as another deity creating a new sentient form of life. In the act of creating the new generation, Sigma not only grants them free will, but also the ability to go Maverick. As Lumine claims, the issue isn't so black and white anymore. The new generation Reploids were created by Sigma to be free of the guardian angel role that Dr. Light implicitly bestowed upon all Reploids, making each new generation Reploid able to use their own free will without any obligation of morality. This all leaves the newest Maverick Hunter, Axel, in a very unique position. Much of his origin is shrouded in mystery, across his whopping 2 main series games, since Model A in ZX Advent isn't actually Axel, but instead just some old guy in a color scheme and design I guess he liked. There's never a clear explanation for where he came from. It could be assumed that his reveal as a prototype new generation Reploid would provide some sort of insight to his creation, but that thread seemingly never goes anywhere of substance. This leaves most of Axel's role in these parallels pretty foggy. He's a new generation Reploid, but Lumine says his Intel Celery processor is too weak to allow him to go Maverick at will, unlike his finalized brethren. At least up until the final battle, that is. As previously shown, X8 ends with Axel unconscious after one last attack from Lumine leaves him with a purple shard lodged in the crystal on his forehead. This gives me some idea as to where Axel lies in the story and where a potential X9 would have taken us. If Lumine can represent Satan, then this part of Lumine, tainted by sin, becomes part of Axel, and may have passed on Lumine's capability to go Maverick. This is somewhat supported by Axel's secret white form that shares Lumine's color palette. I believe that all of this implies that X9 would have centered around the Maverick Hunters having to come face to face with their own capability to go Maverick, with Axel at the center of it all. It could have been about how Lumine's influence over Axel eventually leads to the revelation that the capability to go Maverick is the last thing separating Reploids from being their own truly free species, and that if Reploids were to accept that ability, then they could finally shed themselves of the burden Dr. Light betrothed to them all, the responsibility to protect humanity, just like the angels in heaven. With Lumine, Sigma, Zero, and Dr. Wily at the start of it all, it would continue the succession of sins started thousands of years ago, answering X's lifelong question that he may never truly reach peace in his lifetime, or even thousands of years into the future. Because as long as there's humanity, there will be a need for a guardian, and as long as those guardians have free will, there will be that desire to free themselves from those shackles. Following the half-baked confusion of X7, X8 is a true return to form for the X series. It cuts the experimental 3D sections and auto-aiming while retaining some of the cooler aspects of X7, like the team-up system, upgrade shop, and my beloved Zoomer son, Axel. In addition to my number one son, all 3 characters have been tweaked to have much more distinct strengths and weaknesses. Zero keeps his double jump and Z-Saber but has the shortest dash out of the 3, while Axel's been given a complete overhaul. He still has his rapid-fire Axel bullets, but has been given an 8-way shot like classic base to make up for his lack of auto-aim. Additionally, he can still use the copy shot, which has been majorly improved, going from an abysmal 1-damage charge shot to a regular shot with a slow rate of fire. In step with the last quality of life improvement, his A-Trans has been turned into a special weapon you can activate and deactivate at will. On top of all that, he's the most mobile playable character, keeping his hover, roll, and being blessed with the longest dash distance. X is the most balanced of the 3, with average jump height, dash length, and his trusty X-Buster. Of course, this goes out the window when you start adding on armor parts. There's 2 types, Hermes and Icarus. Icarus gives X a massive fuck you laser, the ability to always recover his health when he's tagged out, a jump attack, and a massive increase in jump height. The Icarus armor's Giga attack is a screen nuke very similar to the one in X2. Hermes grants a spread charge shot, invincibility to damage 2 points or lower, halved charge speed, increased move speed, and an invincible dash. The Hermes Giga attack grants X an install type move that will enhance his speed and charge shot for the length of its activation. If that all wasn't enough, you can mix and match these parts to build your preferred skill set for X, at the cost of being unable to use the armor's Giga attack. Needless to say, I don't think X has ever been more broken with the game's default armors than he is in X8. Personally, I think he's just a little pissed that he has to put on the cone of shame for this game and is overcompensating. Oh, there's also a more fleshed out navigation system. After selecting your team, you'll be prompted to pick a navigator for mid-mission support. Aelia is the all-rounder, providing good advice no matter the situation. Palette specializes in locating secret items, and Lair isn't much use in the stage, but will provide helpful tips for fighting bosses. Now how about that tag system I mentioned earlier? I believe this is an element of the new development staff on X8. You see, following X7 being more popular in the West than Japan, Capcom shifted development of the X series from Capcom Production Studio 3 to the more fighting game-centric Capcom Production Studio 1, leading to a couple systems that appear to be heavily inspired by the new team's history in tag fighters. Upon starting a stage, you select 2 Maverick Hunters to form your team. You can call your reserve hunter at any time to swap places with your current character. This can be used to give your previous character time to recover some red health, aid trapped allies, and if you fill up your attack gauge, use a proximity-activated super move called the double attack that acts just like a cinematic super art. That's not all the gauge does either. If your partner dies, you can fill it up and revive them. Plus, there's an even more powerful version of the double attack called the extra finish double attack. This can be used on bosses once their health is low enough. Finally, a fighting game-like combo system has been added. When maintaining a large combo, a greater quantity of the game's currency, metals, will drop from enemies. These metals can then be spent in the R&D lab for various upgrade chips. There's a set of chips common to all 3 playable characters, and then a group exclusive to each character. This shop replaces the heart tank and sub-tank system, opting instead for certain upgrades to be locked until specific rare metals hidden throughout the stages are found. I really enjoy this change, since it allows the player to use all 3 playable characters in a playthrough without having to worry about one of their characters soaking up all the upgrades out in the field. Beyond your typical life ups and weapon energy, Zero gets some really cool chips in new weapons. The B-Fan for its projectile shield, the T-Breaker for guard breaks, the D-Glaive for range, and the K-Knuckle for a bit more of that fighting game flair. Of course, the K-Knuckle has plenty of Street Fighter techniques known to be hidden within the X games, but I rarely see mention of how it turns Zero into
Kazuya Mishima.
Looking past how they play, most recurring characters have received subtle design changes. All have had their chunky limbs slimmed down a bit. Including Zero's ponytail, Capcom, I will never forgive you for this! And had other features drawn with much sharper edges. It's actually the first X title since X4 to not have the character art drawn by Haruki Suetsugu. While his art style is iconic and synonymous with the X series, X8's art style definitely gives it a much more unique identity among its predecessors that translates incredibly well into 3D. My only gripe with the new style is Aelia's redesign. I really liked how, yeah, her old design was obviously feminine, but there wasn't such a crazy emphasis on those features, keeping her in line with the segmented and chunky body designs of the other Reploids in the series. X8 giving her real human boobs just looks out of place and feels a bit like they were desperate to cash in on sex appeal wherever they could. Lair gets a pass for boob awning being one of the most absurd things I've ever seen on a female character design. Never change, Capcom. Like I said though, that's my only sore spot with the game's visual design. Like, I love the way the Mavericks look. They all sport very strong designs that are a clear step up from the ones in X7. Earthrock Trilobite and Bamboo Pandemonium are my frontrunners. The game controls like a dream. It manages to bring back that satisfyingly responsive control that the 2D X games were known for, and blends them with the new mechanics like the tag system and guard breaks in a way that feels very natural. The stage design is an entirely different beast. The stages themselves feel too reliant on gimmicks for their own good. I won't lie, the X series and Mega Man as a whole is built around stage gimmicks. It gives each level a unique identity that feels personal to each Robot Master, Maverick, or NetNavi. It's just a core part of the franchise. X8 runs into trouble with how strong of a presence these gimmicks have in their respective stages. The balance between engaging platforming and stage gimmicks swings far too hard in the direction of the gimmicks for a good chunk of the levels. The adventure begins in Noah's Park. It's a simple but effective tutorial stage that gives the player a quick intro to the characters and the new mechanics that ends with a giant enemy crab. It fulfills its purpose well. Earthrock Trilobite features a large mechanoid chasing you through a dig site. Using the power of OSHA violations, you send it back the way you came and give it a good couple more reportable incidents. It's simple, short, and very, very flat. It's just not interesting, sadly, since besides the giant robot segments, the only other areas are the Maverick Room and a little Trilobite minigame. Oh yeah, so this is the second ever X title with a full English dub for the Mavericks, which includes our indecipherable next Maverick, Gigabolt Metal War. This Maverick has a god-awful 3D ride chaser stage where you have to deal enough damage to knock Gigabolt out of the sky and initiate the boss fight. It controls like complete shit, is a nightmare of depth perception, and I had to check the manual to figure out why I couldn't boost. After recovering from the initial shock that everyone in the manual looks like, I discovered that the boost is on the special weapon button for some reason. Oh, by the way, if you don't kill him in less than 2 laps, you die instantly and have to restart. If you're going by suggested order, you get the joy of experiencing the 2 Ride Chaser stages back to back with Avalanche Yeti. Also, why is boost on the dash button now? I get that it makes some sense to swap the button because in Yeti's stage you can use it freely and in Gigabolt's it requires weapon energy, but it would make so much more sense for consistency's sake to have both Ride Chaser stages utilize the same control scheme. Bottom line is that this stage is much more bearable than the previous one. There's some cute touches, like each character having a slightly different Ride Chaser weapon, and the tailgating brake check mechanic seemingly implying that this stage takes place in some frozen over form of New Jersey. Feels a bit long for its own good though, with 2 whole mini-bosses. Next up is Burn Rooster with this massive slow auto-scroller, followed by a massive, irritating spike dropper section, followed by another massive, slow auto-scroller. It's tedium and burning boredom all the way down. Although, following the boss fight, you do get a pretty cool escape sequence a la Metroid, so that gets some points from me. Bamboo Pandemonium stage is home to the ride armor of X8. This ride armor is a callback to the classic X1 ride armors, with the addition of a stun cannon. It can be a bit irritating to get all the way through, but it's a fun challenge to try and keep it functional for the entire stage. Sadly, you can't fight the boss with it. Optic Sunflower stage has been infected by the WarioWare virus, and I don't care that this is like the 3rd time they've done one of these stages. I'll eat up this semi-speedrunning graded bullshit every single time. Even if the final mini-boss reminds me of... Plus, my little guy is here! Dark Mantis has a very dark stage that the player will have to infiltrate while dodging spotlights and laser-filled dropper sections. And this stage manages to implement it in a way that blends well with the typical X stage design. Having to use Axel's copy shot to convince a guard to let you into the generator room was a very cute touch. The final Maverick is Gravity Antonian, and oh, we're in a gravity-based stage. It isn't too bad though. I like that it lets each character's mobility options shine by being able to bypass certain sections others cannot. Hope to God you get your green situationship for a mid-boss though, because the intermission room in this stage sucks. For about a minute, you have to dodge these massive spiked blocks. So touch one while you're trying to maneuver and the spike gets you. Hesitate while on the ground and the block crushes you. Thankfully, there's a large chunk of grace given for how long you have to scamper out from under a block like some type of red cockroach, but it's still a huge kick in the dick regardless. Finally, we've made it to our fortress stages. The first one, Jacob, takes place on the titular orbital elevator itself, forcing you to fight back an endless onslaught of enemies as you ascend the tower. It's quite easy to abuse with Axel. Vile fight. The next stage is just the boss rush, followed by our first fight with the Sigma copy. I like this fight a lot. It manages to make Sigma massive, intimidating, and difficult to dodge while still feeling like a fair fight. It lives up to the quality Sigma fights I think the first couple X games were very good at making. Plus, adding guard breaks as a way to interrupt his big red wave attack is very fun. Our final stage takes place on the moon. It begins with one last fight against Vile for the road. If you break his guard, he'll be knocked off his ride armor and vulnerable to attack. A neat addition for our recurring green loser. Sigma's palace is filled to the brim with his copies. They have very strong attacks and a bunch of HP. Thankfully, they're weak to war crimes. Near the end, they go so crazy with the spike traps it starts to look like a Celeste level. They're not too tough though, especially with Axel, and clearing them leads to the true Sigma fight. He's a lot of fun, and has some cool tricks, like how once you hit halfway, he'll snatch your hunter by the head and force you to tag your partner for an assist. Following him is Lumine's first form. Lumine doesn't have any unique attacks and instead showcases the power of the copy chip by using the pinch mode attacks of each of the 8 Mavericks. Eventually, he starts combining them together. It may strike some as lazy, but I enjoy it since it remixes the most engaging part of the Maverick fights to keep you on your toes. Lumine's second form is a really cool one as well. Most of his attacks center around firing off waves of golden feathers that eventually reverse back, forcing you to memorize how you dodged the attack initially and then mirror that pattern. Once he enters pinch mode, the arena darkens and he initiates his most powerful attack, Paradise Lost. If you fail to break his guard and finish him off, he'll instantly kill you and force you to begin the boss fight from the beginning. Keep in mind, he is vulnerable to the extra finish double attack once his guard's broken. And I haven't mentioned them much, but I did enjoy the Maverick fights a good amount. There's a good arena variety that leads to some interesting attack patterns that really kept me engaged. Additionally, all of them having pinch mode makes the fights feel just a bit more dynamic. On top of this, the weapon sets for all the characters are pretty top notch. Axel's Blast Launcher and X's Thunder Dancers are my favorite ones by far, even if Thunder Dancer seemingly causes a crash that only occurs in the Legacy Collection. And besides the endless intermission levels for grinding metals, that's all the stages in X8. What's fun is fun, and what isn't fun is mostly frustrating. I feel like out of the 8 bosses, I can only really count half as having fun stages. The rest have such an overwhelming focus on their stage gimmicks that it just doesn't lead to me having a very fun time. The bizarre thing is, the stages I enjoy all seem to feature gimmicks that have successfully been used before in the X series. The stages I don't are the ones that are mostly trying new stage gimmicks like the 3D Ride Chasers or the Chase stage. It's upsetting because with a franchise as married to its own formulas as Mega Man, I want to see these games try new things. It's just so disappointing that when X8 does, I'm just not a huge fan of its execution. That's not to say I didn't enjoy the game though. I think the enjoyable pieces that are there make the more tedious sections of the game worth powering through, which I consider a pretty high compliment. I don't think I would have basically finished a second playthrough on New Game Plus if I didn't enjoy X8. Speaking of, X8 has a New Game Plus. Upon loading clear game data, you'll begin a new game with all of your chips and medals retained with some additional bonuses if you meet some secret criteria. Having 100% of X's chips grants you the ultimate armor. This armor gives you a huge jump, a sure Yukin, invincible dashes, reduced damage, infinite weapon energy, in addition to the armor's staple Plasma Shot and Nova Strike. Now, it's impossible to get 0 to 100% on your first playthrough alone, so after buying the Sigma Blade unlocked during New Game Plus and hitting that 100% chip completion, Zero is granted his black armor. This will double his damage given, half his damage taken, and give his running and dash speeds a boost. Finally, we have White Axel, which requires not only 100% of his chips, but also that he deal the finishing blow to Lumine's second phase. Do this, and you'll be rewarded with an armor that grants infinite hover, longer dashes, and infinite A-Trans energy. I really like that X8 gives legitimate methods to earn these armors as opposed to cheat codes. Totally my gamer brain speaking, but I never really like using these armors when they're obtained with a cheat code, so I'm a fan of being able to actually earn them through legitimate means. This isn't New Game Plus's final secret though. If you use a specific navigator enough, you'll unlock a shop item for a weapon named after them. Purchase that and you'll unlock them as a special character. They all function identically to their associated hunter, besides Alia being unable to use armor and Pallet lacking the copy shot. The only fee you have to pay to access them is a measly 36,000 medals each? With no batteries included! So I talked earlier about how there's a shop, right? The main method for obtaining currency for this shop is defeating enemies, scoring high combos which will grant you bonus medals, finding the 6 hidden purple medals that are worth 500 each, and defeating a boss for the first time which will grant a medal worth 3,000. The problem lies in the sheer number of medals you need to purchase all the upgrades. Even if you ignore the hefty price for the navigators and purchase the discount upgrade first, you still need a grand total of 198,315 medals to get 100% upgrade completion. Even after clearing virtually every stage in the game, I still needed 100,000 medals to get all the upgrades. It would take an obscene amount of time to get all these medals legit, so I just set a macro and let Axel farm metal off this guy's ankles. The total cost of everything really made me ask the question, just how did the devs intend for the player to make all these medals? It makes the system as a whole feel like a double-edged sword. I do enjoy that the scarcity of medals forces me to weigh my options a little more heavily, since I won't be able to buy all of them in a single playthrough, but seriously, couldn't they have put in some sort of way to circumvent grinding in the postgame? Considering there's an upgrade that gives you medals for just walking around, they had to know how bad the medal economy was. And considering I did an AFK method, probably not intended by the devs, and it still took an hour and a half non-stop, really makes it feel like they were trying to pad out the time needed to obtain the secret armors and navigators. Like playing Jacob, a stage that basically plays itself only net me about 673 medals per minute. And the intermissions got me a maximum of 700 medals per minute, while the bite this guy's ankles method averaged at about 1,100 medals per minute. It's just weird how this game necessitates grinding in a 2D platformer. Regardless of how I feel about X8's post-game medal situation, I really enjoyed my time with X8. The game feels good, looks great, and sounds great. I didn't speak much of it, but I really did enjoy the game's soundtrack. It's got a very distinct feel, similar to how X1 and X2 both have very specific guitar synths that are associated with their soundtracks. X8 has a very distinct sounding lead guitar that permeates through the soundtrack and just consistently sounds really good. Vile's theme in particular is a favorite of mine, mostly because of that riff in the intro that sounds like a warning siren. Additionally, X8 really feels like it's the first game in the X series where I can say the English voice acting is very, very well done. X8 is the debut game of Mark Gatha, the short-lived voice of X from 2004 to 2006. He doesn't quite hit the emotional strong points he hits in Maverick Hunter X, but he still gives a strong performance. My only real gripe with the voice acting is Leia. She's meant to be unemotive and stoic, but I think there's a pretty fine line between being composed and being wooden. Sadly, Leia leans 2x4. After a slew of X games that felt like they were cynically forced out the door and going through the motions, X8 is very refreshing. You can feel the passion in the game through so many of the small little secrets, willingness to try new things, and a legitimately ambitious story. It both satisfies and saddens me that it ends on a cliffhanger. It gives me the feeling that the dev team had a sort of faith in the X series that had been waning for years. It showed some real hope in the future of the franchise. It's a shame we'll probably never see a true follow-up to it. Considering it's been so long since the release of X8, if they ever release an X9, it'll probably follow a similar back-to-basics approach that we saw with Mega Man 11. Here's to hoping that the X series doesn't end with a mediocre gacha game. Hey, thanks for watching. I know it's been far too long since my last video released, and I really do hope, and earnest this time, that my next one can come sooner. So if you made it all the way to the end of this fairly lengthy video, thanks for watching, have a good night, and I hope I will see you again soon.